While there's no better price than free, I've documented games of that nature in a previous video. Besides, should your enjoyment of a game really be measured in cost per hour? If you feel that it should, there are a number of great titles from the 90s in particular that are worth putting money down for, because they offer a fantastic return on minimal investment. Especially if you're like me and wait until they're at least 75% off. But that's obvious to anyone with taste. Let's make things a little more interesting. The real kicker of this particular list, I personally bought every single one of these games on sale for under £1. Oh yeah, one game per series. Furthermore, to make this list, the games have to have been published in the 90s and have been available for purchase digitally as of 2021. Sorry, Daggerfall. And I'm not counting games with infinite replay value instead of a campaign or procedurally generated content. That's another video for another time. So hop on your currency converters briefly, and then let's go! Caesar Free. I purchased Caesar Free for someone I lived with a long time ago, because they were obsessively playing Zeus. It turns out that this was a very good purchase indeed. Caesar Free was dirt cheap, but the campaign most certainly wasn't, with levels lasting hours if you want them to, and with plenty of them to plough through as you get your Roman cities in order. If you really take your time with things, it can bleed 90 hours of your time away from you, like thrusting yourself upon a Roman spear formation. Since it was only 89p, that works out at just under a penny an hour, and that's good value. Ultima VII, The Black Gate. The Black Gate was a huge RPG with around 70 hours of content, but this was par for the course with Ultima fans, who were used to getting an enormous Lord British RPG every few years by this point. What they weren't contending on was receiving a second part called The Serpent Isle, released the following year and bolstering the game's content with a further 30 hours of play. When combined with The Forge of Virtue and Silver Steed, you're looking at a title that can keep you playing for well over 100 hours if you let yourself sink into the world of Britannia. Sure, it's not Daggerfall, but the lack of procedural generation in this title makes it all the more memorable, and Bethesda's huge RPG was released for free, while this is still commercially available. Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Now, back to strategies. This is the fantasy turn-based game to end them all, and is quite possibly the pinnacle of the series, depending on who you ask. It's both addictive and lengthy, but apparently the developers of the game decided that wasn't enough content, with 2 expansion packs, Armageddon's Blade and the Shadow of Death, extending the playtime even further to 100 hours worth of strategy, for those who like to take their time. Combine that with the In the Wake of the Gods and the Horn of the Abyss fan expansions, and you're looking at crazy value for such an outstanding title. Darklands. This brutal Germanic RPG is cheaper than the Infinity Engine games it inspired, and while a lot of your time will be spent getting eaten by monsters and beaten to death by brigands, it has an extensive campaign full of retro pixelated goodness, and plenty of choice and consequences for old school RPG fans to sink their teeth into. Rollercoaster Tycoon. I worship the ground that Chris Sawyer walks upon since he graced us with Transport Tycoon. But it's not even his most famous game, and it didn't have levels or scenarios, just different map types. The game that is that, and does have levels, would be the Rollercoaster Tycoon series, his last gift to 90s gaming. Rollercoaster Tycoon has 23 scenarios, which might not sound like much, but each of these parks has strict winning requirements that can often take hours to achieve. So for the dedicated completionist, being able to purchase this for a mere 71p means hundreds of hours of fairground music being drilled into their head and the head of anyone living with them. Not that I'd know anything about that. Still not as annoying as the Zeus sound effects, trust me. Railroad Tycoon 2. This train-focused business management sim differed from Transport Tycoon in that it had a campaign. This stretched out over about 36 maps, with each of them lasting between 20 minutes and an hour. An entirely respectable amount of content, but nothing incredible by the then generous standards of the time. But it got an expansion pack, adding 23 more maps to that, which certainly bumped up the playtime. Except we're not done here, as the Gold Edition came out and added 18 more. Neat! Except we're still not done here. the Platinum Edition appeared, with 50 more standalone scenarios made by the community. That gives us 126 in total if the wiki is to be believed. That's a lot of maps for you to lay train tracks over. And if you simply must complete it all, it'll take you between 100 and 200 hours. Or you could end up like 666 on Steam, whose 800 plus hours were the reason I bought it, for 74 pence. Total Annihilation. Cave Dog Studios' top-down robot-focused RTS went for an absolutely absurd 21p in the sale when I picked it up, complete with all its expansions. A solid campaign somewhere between 60 to 100 hours awaits you, and more explosions and flying steel about you than you could ever hope to deal with. Certain obsessive players of this game will measure their game time in years, not hours. Will you be one of them? Only time and a lot of destruction will tell. Wizardry 7. A Blobber is a first-person party-based and often grid-based role-playing game where you control everyone all at once in an overworld or a dungeon, and then control the team in turn-based or real-time combat scenarios. The other calling card of Blobbers is that they're massive time sinks that you can spend hundreds of hours on, obsessively grinding your way through monsters and leveling up your characters through vast worlds and dungeons, to the exclusion of everything else in life. Crusaders of the Dark Savant, the 7th Wizardry game, is the ultimate grid-based time sink, a game you can lose yourself in. There's no expansions, the game is simply enormous. And since it comes bundled with its predecessor on Steam, it only cost me 29p for 100 hours of monster slaying fun. Might and Magic 6. Unfortunately for Wizardry, there was another series of blobbers that came along called Might and Magic, and much like on this list, it's slightly ahead. Might and Magic 6 is related to Heroes of Might and Magic 3, but it's a different series despite being played in the same world. This is a real-time with pause blobber that boasts free movement in the first person, with playtimes ranging between 80 to 100 plus hours, depending on how thorough you want to be with it. It's part of the Might Magic 6-pack, a compilation CD that was eventually released on GOG.com. These 6 games clock in at about 300 hours of content for less than the price of a sandwich when discounted. The only better value for money is the Elder Scrolls Trilogy on GOG. But the first 2 games come for free and the third wasn't published in the 90s. Though from personal experience, it's quite good. The Might and Magic Merge project, also known as World of Enroth, implores you to purchase 7 and 8 and play a seamless 200-hour journey that is unmatched in blobber history. Even if you just stick to vanilla or maybe add a widescreen mod, it's both ridiculously cheap per hour and, like all the games on this list, will absorb your time like a fantasy sponge. You have been warned. I'll probably make another one of these about games in the 2000s. Keep your eye out for that. Until then.